The solicitor's hand shook as he passed me the keys. Not a tremor of age, but something else. A faint, almost imperceptible shudder that vibrated up my arm when I took them. Heavy, cold iron, smelling faintly of rust and something sharp like old lemons. Blackwood Manor. The name itself felt like a bruise. I hadn't seen my grandmother in 30 years, not since the incident, not since Leela. The solicitor, a man with eyes that darted like trapped sparrows, cleared his throat. "The estate is extensive," he managed, his gaze fixing on a point just over my shoulder. "And as per the terms of the will, it all belongs to you, Mr. Dean." My own hands felt clammy. I'd been expecting this, of course. A distant relative, the last of the line, and the old woman had no one else. But the finality of it, the weight of those keys, settled a cold dread in my gut that had nothing to do with inheritance. It was the house. It was what the house held. The drive out was a blur of gray skies and spitting rain. Each mile felt like a step backward, a descent into a past I'd spent decades trying to outrun. My studio, usually a sanctuary of controlled chaos, had become a cage lately. The canvases stared back at me, mocking my attempts to capture anything other than the same suffocating fear. My agent had called twice, his voice laced with that polite concern that always felt like an accusation. He didn't understand. How could he? He hadn't seen her. He hadn't felt her eyes on him. The gates of Blackwood Manor were wrought iron, twisted into grotesque floral patterns that seemed to writhe in the failing light. They groaned open at my approach, a sound like a dying breath. The driveway was choked with weeds, the gravel long since surrendered to nature. The house loomed, a skeletal silhouette against the bruised twilight. It was bigger than I remembered, far bigger. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of decay. It clung to my throat, a dry, suffocating presence. Every surface was draped in white sheets, spectral figures in the gloom. My footsteps echoed unnervingly on the bare floorboards. The silence was profound, broken only by the creak of settling timbers and the distant, mournful cry of the wind. I ran a hand over a dust-laden mantelpiece, the grit rough against my fingertips. This was it, my inheritance, my prison. Portraits of stern-faced ancestors watched me from the walls, their painted eyes seeming to follow my every move. I found myself drawn against my better judgment to the rear of the house. A heavy oak door, warped and stained, stood ajar. It led, the solicitor had mentioned, to the servants' quarters and the utility spaces. The scent of damp earth and mildew intensified. A long, narrow corridor stretched before me, lined with peeling wallpaper that depicted faded pastoral scenes, now warped into something unsettling, the painted sheep appearing to gnaw at each other, the industrial machines humming. The words themselves seemed to vibrate in my memory, a phantom echo of my childhood nightmares. I found it at the end of the hall, the laundry room. It was vast, cavernous, and blessedly free of the sheets that choked the rest of the house. But the air here was different, heavy, humid, and carrying a faint metallic tang. Towering over the space were rows of colossal, ancient laundry machines, and they were humming. A low, guttural drone that vibrated through the concrete floor and up into my teeth. It was a sound that felt wrong, a sound that shouldn't be there in this abandoned wing of this decaying house. The humming wasn't constant. It ebbed and flowed, a rhythmic pulse that seemed to synchronize with my own racing heartbeat. Instead, I saw a flicker of movement, a flash of something pale, something small, tucked away in the corner of the drum. My breath hitched. My eyes, accustomed to the dim light, strained to focus. It was a doll, a porcelain doll with vacant blue eyes and a painted smile that was too wide, too fixed. Leela. He was wearing a faded calico dress, the fabric brittle and stained. Her hair, once a cascade of golden curls, was now matted and discolored. But it was her eyes. Those vacant blue eyes, staring out from the dimness, seemed to hold a spark of malevolent awareness. How had she gotten here, and why did it feel like he had been waiting? The iron gates of Blackwood Manor groaned a protest as I pushed them open. They were heavy, ornate things, twisted metal that looked like skeletal fingers reaching for the sky. Rust flaked off onto my hands, a gritty, metallic kiss that felt like a curse. The air here was different, thick and still, carrying the scent of damp earth and something else, something cloying and sweet like decaying lilies. My car, a sleek, modern thing, seemed an intruder on the overgrown drive, its polished chrome a stark contrast to the crumbling stone of the house. The manor itself loomed, a hulking silhouette against a bruised twilight sky. Windows, dark and vacant, stared out like empty sockets. Ivy, thick and relentless, clung to its walls, obscuring the details, making it appear as if the house were slowly being consumed by the very earth it stood upon. My grandmother. I hadn't seen her in 20 years, not since Leela. The keys felt impossibly heavy in my palm, each one a promise of secrets I wasn't sure I wanted to uncover. Stepping onto the porch, the wood creaked a mournful song beneath my weight. The front door, a massive slab of dark oak, stood ajar as if inviting me into its shadowed embrace. I pushed it open further, the hinges shrieking in protest. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that pierced the gloom from a high, grimy window. To my left, a drawing room lay shrouded in dust sheets, the ghostly outlines of forgotten furniture hinting at a life long past. To my right, a dining room, the long table set with cobweb-draped china, seemed frozen in time, awaiting guests who would never arrive. I could feel the house watching me, its unseen eyes tracking my every move. He had been a recluse for years, her life shrinking to the confines of this decaying edifice. Why had she left it to me? Why now? I walked further into the hall, my boots scuffing against the faded Persian rug. The silence wasn't empty, it was full. I needed to get my bearings to find where I might actually sleep. A sign, faded but still legible, read, "Laundry room, industrial machines humming." That last part was odd. Industrial machines. In a house this old? Curiosity, a dangerous companion, tugged at me. I reached for the doorknob. As my fingers closed around it, a faint thrumming seemed to vibrate through the wood, a low, persistent hum that I hadn't noticed before. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A rhythmic pulse like a sleeping beast. I turned the knob. The door swung open, revealing a space that defied the rest of the house's decay. It was a stark, utilitarian room, gleaming with stainless steel. Two enormous, hulking washing machines and dryers, the kind I'd find in a commercial establishment, dominated the space. They were silent now, but their sheer presence was jarring. The air here was different too, cleaner, with a faint metallic tang that fought with the pervasive floral scent. Yet the humming, it was more pronounced here. A deep, resonant vibration that seemed to emanate from the very floorboards, from the metal of the machines themselves. I stepped inside, the door closing softly behind me. The light, a harsh, fluorescent glare, was a shock after the gloom of the hall. I ran a hand along the side of one of the machines. It was cool to the touch, solid, industrial, but the humming, it felt like it was in my bones. I walked over to the second machine, a dryer this time, and then I saw it. Tucked away in the corner, partially obscured by a stack of what looked like old, bleached linens, was a small wooden rocking chair. It was old, its paint chipped and faded, and sitting in it, her china face turned towards the door, was Leela. My breath hitched. He was smaller than I remembered, her porcelain limbs impossibly delicate, her painted smile fixed and unnerving. Her eyes, glass orbs, seemed to bore into me, a silent accusation. The humming from the machine seemed to deepen, to vibrate with a new intensity. Had she always been here, in this strange industrial room? The smell of dust and something else, something faintly sweet and decaying, clung to my clothes as I stepped onto the overgrown gravel path. Blackwood Manor loomed, a silhouette against the bruised twilight sky, my estranged grandmother. I barely remembered her, a stern, distant figure in faded photographs. Now this, her legacy. The front door, a behemoth of dark oak, yielded with a reluctant sigh. Inside, the air was colder, a damp chill that seeped into my bones. I moved through the downstairs rooms, a labyrinth of shrouded furniture and the ghosts of a life I never knew. Portraits with accusing eyes followed my progress. My grandmother had been a collector, the estate lawyer had said. Of what, I hadn't asked. Now I was beginning to understand. Every surface was cluttered. Shelves overflowed with porcelain figurines, their painted smiles unsettlingly fixed. Old books, their spines cracked and brittle, lay in precarious stacks. A faint, cloying perfume, like dried flowers left too long, hung in the air. It was suffocating. I found myself drawn to a narrow staircase, its banister slick with a thin film of grime. It led down into the bowels of the house. The air grew heavier with each step, the sweet decay intensifying. A low, thrumming sound began to emanate from below, a steady, mechanical pulse that vibrated through the soles of my boots. It was a sound I hadn't heard in years, a sound I desperately tried to forget. The door at the bottom of the stairs was heavy steel, scarred and industrial. It was a jarring anomaly in the ornate decay of the manor. A small, tarnished brass plate bore a single word, laundry. The thrumming grew louder, a rhythmic churning that seemed to fill the very marrow of my bones. I pushed the door open. The laundry room, industrial machines humming. It was vast, a cavernous space dominated by rows of enormous, gleaming metal cylinders. They were old, the kind I'd see in a forgotten factory, their surfaces worn smooth by decades of unseen use. Steam hissed from unseen vents, carrying with it the metallic tang of detergent and something else, something coppery and foul. The air was thick with humidity, making my skin prickle and my breath catch. The machines were running, their powerful motors a deep, resonant growl that shook the concrete floor. One particularly large machine. Its door, a circular viewport of thick, distorted glass, was in full operation, its contents churning with a violent, relentless rhythm. I stood frozen, my gaze fixed on the spinning drum. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. The sound, the smell, it was all too familiar. A memory sharp and jagged pierced through the fog of my adult life. A small, cramped space. The smell of bleach and something worse. The frantic whirring of machinery. My mother's voice, a thin, reedy thread of panic. My eyes scanned the room, darting from one hulking machine to another. There were shelves lining the walls, piled high with faded linens, stained towels, and industrial-sized boxes of detergent. And then I saw it. Tucked away on a high shelf, half hidden behind a stack of moth-eaten blankets, was a small wooden chest. My grandmother's belongings. A tremor ran through me, involuntary and profound. I climbed onto a rickety stool, my hands shaking as I reached for the chest. The wood felt rough beneath my fingertips. The latch clicked open with a sharp, decisive sound. Inside, nestled amongst yellowed tissue paper, was a doll. Leela. He was exactly as I remembered her, yet horrifyingly different. Her painted blue eyes, wide and vacant, seemed to bore into me, accusing. A single, stiff blonde braid hung down her back, matted and dull. He was smaller than I remembered, deceptively so. She fit in the palm of my hand, a fragile, malevolent thing. A wave of nausea washed over me. The industrial machine seemed to pulse in time with my frantic heartbeat. Fragments of memory, sharp and unwelcome, flooded my mind. A child's scream, the doll's unblinking stare. I recoiled, stumbling back from the shelf. The chest clattered to the floor, spilling its contents. Leela landed face down on the concrete, her painted smile now pressed against the grime. The sound of the industrial machine seemed to grow louder, the humming a deafening roar. The air in the laundry room, industrial machines humming, grew thick and suffocating. My breath hitched in my throat. What had my grandmother done with her all these years? The air in the laundry room, industrial machines humming, was thick with the scent of damp fabric and a metallic tang that scraped the back of my throat. It was a smell I hadn't encountered since childhood, a phantom scent that always preceded Leela. The hulking washing machines, scarred and stained, throbbed with a deep, resonant hum, a mechanical heartbeat in the otherwise silent house. I'd come here searching for any sign of my grandmother's belongings, hoping to find answers or at least a distraction from the gnawing unease that had settled in my bones since my arrival. My fingers traced the cold, pitted metal of a dryer door. It was unlocked. Inside, a single, child-sized white sock lay nestled amongst the lint. It was identical to the ones Leela always wore, the ones that seemed to grow longer, more impossibly thin with each passing year. My breath hitched. This was no coincidence. I could feel it, a cold tendril of dread coiling in my gut. The sock. It was a physical manifestation of the encroaching madness. I slammed the dryer door shut, the clang echoing through the cavernous room. The humming of the machine seemed to intensify, a chorus of mechanical disapproval. Then I heard it. A soft, almost imperceptible rustling like tissue paper being crinkled. It came from the corner where a stack of old linens sat draped over a wooden bench. I froze, my eyes darting towards the sound. Nothing, no answer. Of course, no answer. I was alone, utterly, terrifyingly alone. I forced myself to move, my boots crunching on something gritty beneath the soles. More lint, I told myself. Just more lint. But as I neared the bench, a faint, cloying sweetness tickled my nostrils, cutting through the stale, damp air. It was the smell of decaying flowers, of forgotten perfume. It was Leela's scent. My gaze fell upon the linens. One corner, a patch of faded floral print, seemed to ripple, as if something underneath were shifting. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. I reached out a trembling hand, my fingers brushing against the rough weave of the fabric. Beneath it, nestled amongst the folded sheets, was a small porcelain doll. It wasn't Leela, not exactly. This doll was different. Its painted smile was cracked, a jagged line across its pale, dusty face. But the dress was the same shade of faded rose as Leela's. And the hair, a tangled mass of synthetic blonde, was styled in the same unnervingly neat pigtails. I recoiled as if I'd been burned. This was a decoy, a proxy. Leela was toying with me, luring me into a false sense of security before. Before what? A sudden, sharp creak from above made me jump. The floorboards in the room directly overhead. I hadn't been up there. No one had been in this house for years, not since my grandmother. My blood felt like ice water in my veins. I backed away from the doll, my eyes glued to the ceiling. The creaking stopped. A profound silence descended, broken only by the rhythmic throb of the machines. It sounded like a child's voice, distorted and thin, like a recording played backward. "You can't hide, Dean." My head snapped up. The voice was coming from everywhere. I clapped my hands over my ears, but the sound seemed to bypass them, resonating directly in my skull. "We're waiting." My hands dropped, the doll on the bench, its head had turned, just a fraction but undeniably. Its empty eye sockets seemed to bore into me. I stumbled backward, my heel catching on the leg of the bench. I fell the rough floorboards, scraping my palms. The smell of dust and decay filled my lungs. I scrambled to my feet, my eyes wide, scanning the room. The doll was still. The linens were still. The machines hummed their monotonous song. Was I losing my mind? Was this the effect of the house, of the memories I'd tried so hard to bury? I turned and fled the laundry room, the industrial machines humming their indifferent farewell. You can't hide. Where was she? And more importantly, what did she want? The air in the laundry room, industrial machines humming, hung thick and damp, clinging to my skin like a shroud. The rhythmic thud of the dryers, a monotonous heartbeat in the bowels of this house, did little to soothe the tremor that had started in my hands. It had been there, a low thrum, ever since I'd seen that glint of porcelain in the shadows of the hallway. Leela. I'd retreated here to the utilitarian chill of the laundry room, industrial machines humming, hoping the sheer normalcy of it, the smell of detergent, the sterile gleam of stainless steel would anchor me. But the hum seemed to vibrate not just in my ears, but in my bones, a discordant note that mirrored the unease coiling in my gut. My canvases were stacked in the studio, waiting for me, waiting for her. The thought sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. I'd been trying to paint, to lose myself in the familiar dance of brush on canvas. But the images wouldn't come, or rather they did come, but not of my choosing, twisted, fragmented visions that clawed at the edges of my mind. I ran a hand over the rough texture of an unfinished piece, a cityscape I'd started before Leela's presence had become undeniable. Now the clean lines were smudged, the vibrant colors leached away, replaced by bruised purples and sickly greens. It looked less like a city and more like a decaying organism. Was that my doing or hers? The laundry room, industrial machines humming offered a temporary reprieve. I found myself staring at the massive washing machines, their glass doors revealing tumbling heaps of fabric. A metaphor, perhaps. My life, my memories, all being spun and bleached and dyed by something I couldn't see. A sudden clatter from the dryer startled me. A metallic shriek, sharp and unexpected, cut through the drone. My head snapped up. Dust motes danced in the single weak bulb overhead. I told myself it was just the machinery settling, the metal contracting in the cool air. But the hairs on my arms prickled, a primal alarm I hadn't felt since I was a child, hiding under my bed. I took a step towards the sound, my boots squeaking on the linoleum, my breath hitched. Each step felt like wading through thick mud. It smelled of damp earth and something else. Something sickly sweet, like decaying flowers. The scent, faint but unmistakable, was the scent of her. My gaze fell on a large, industrial-grade hamper, half hidden behind a stack of old linens. It was made of heavy canvas, stained and worn. It hadn't been there before, I was sure of it. Something shifted within its depths. A subtle rustle, like dry leaves skittering across a pavement. I backed away slowly, my heart racing a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The laundry room, industrial machines humming, was no longer a sanctuary. It was a cage, and the bars were closing in. I could feel her eyes on me, a tangible weight pressing down. I stumbled back, my hand reaching for the doorknob. The metal was slick with condensation. My fingers fumbled. The noise from the dryer stopped abruptly. It wasn't a word, not exactly. More of a sound, a sigh, but it was Leela's sound. The sound that had haunted my nightmares for years. My hand finally found the doorknob. I didn't look back, I couldn't. Back in my studio, the unfinished cityscape seemed to mock me. The bruised colors pulsed. I grabbed a thick charcoal stick, the rough texture a comfort against my trembling fingers. I needed to paint. I needed to get it out. My hand moved with a frantic energy, not guided by me, but by something else. Jagged lines ripped across the canvas, obscuring the city. Forms began to emerge, distorted and grotesque. A face, pale and vacant, with two wide eyes. Tiny porcelain hands reaching, grasping. The air in the studio grew heavy, charged with an unseen energy. The scent of decaying flowers was stronger here, mingling with the acrid smell of the charcoal. I painted Leela, not the doll I remembered, but the entity he had become. Her malice was no longer a subtle influence. It was a tangible force, bleeding onto the canvas, staining my hands, my mind. The brushstrokes were violent, desperate. When I finally dropped the charcoal, my hands were black, my arms aching. I stepped back, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The painting was no longer mine. The quiet in the studio was a fragile thing, easily broken. Was it real, or had the house finally broken me? Had Leela finally consumed me? The question hung in the air, as suffocating as the scent of decay. The smell of stale detergent and something metallic like old pennies coated my tongue. The industrial machines in the laundry room, their metal bellies churning with unseen forces, vibrated through the concrete floor and up my legs. Each thud of a dryer drum was a physical blow, echoing the dull ache that had settled behind my eyes. I'd been searching through the grimy, overflowing filing cabinets in the corner, the ones marked with faded labels I could barely decipher. My grandmother, a woman I'd barely known, a ghost in my own family history, had hoarded everything. Receipts, letters, brittle newspaper clippings. It was a testament to a life lived in shadows, much like the ones that now seem to stretch and writhe in the corners of this room. My fingers, raw from sifting through damp cardboard and brittle paper, brushed against a small, leather-bound journal tucked deep within a drawer. It was cold to the touch, unnaturally so, as if it had been lying in frost. The cover was embossed with a single, intricate symbol, a coiled serpent biting its own tail. I recognized it, a faint, disturbing echo from a forgotten dream. My heart gave a lurch, a sudden, sharp beat against my ribs. This felt different. This felt significant. I pulled it out, the leather creaking in protest. Dust motes danced in the weak shaft of light that pierced the grimy window. The pages were thin, yellowed, and filled with a spidery, almost illegible script. It was my grandmother's hand, I knew it. The same scrawl that had once appeared on birthday cards I'd never received. The entries were sparse at first, mundane observations about the weather, the price of groceries. Then they shifted. The tone grew frantic, laced with a desperate, almost feverish devotion. She wrote about Leela, not as a doll, but as a presence. A confidante, a conduit. My grandmother, it seemed, had been trying to appease it, to control it. She believed Leela held a fragment of something ancient, something that fed on. Attention, on fear, my breath hitched. I remembered now, a flicker of a memory so sharp it felt like a shard of glass in my mind. The attic, the suffocating heat, the smell of mothballs and decaying wood. Leela perched on a dusty rocking chair, her painted eyes fixed on me. My grandmother, standing in the doorway, her face a mask of something I couldn't comprehend then, something that looked like sorrow mixed with a terrifying resolve. The journal entries became more disturbing. My grandmother detailed a pact, a bargain struck in hushed tones with the porcelain thing. She believed Leela could grant wishes, but the price was always steep, always paid in the currency of innocence. She wrote of how he had sought Leela's favor, how he had offered up the brightest spark she possessed, a child's unblemished joy, my joy. The dryers continued their relentless rhythm, a mocking heartbeat. The specific event, the one I had buried so deep, began to surface. The day I found Leela in the attic, not on the chair, but in a small, velvet-lined box. The day I had dared to touch her, to feel the smooth, cool porcelain against my skin. And then, I had been found by my grandmother, huddled in the corner of my room, unable to speak, unable to see anything but the doll's vacant stare. My grandmother's entries detailed the aftermath. He had hidden Leela, she confessed, not to protect me, but to protect herself, to break the hold. But the journal hinted at a deeper, more sinister truth. That Leela wasn't merely an object, it was a vessel, and my grandmother, in her misguided attempts to manipulate its power, had bound something to it, something that had latched onto the child who had awakened it, me. The metallic tang in the air seemed to intensify, acrid and biting. The hum of the machines deepened, a low growl that seemed to emanate from the very walls. My grandmother's final entries were a desperate plea, a confession of her own failures. He had left Leela here, she admitted, hoping the house itself would contain it. But he had also left it for me. An inheritance, a curse. I closed the journal, my hands trembling so violently I could barely grip it. The weight of it felt immense, a physical burden. My childhood trauma wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate act, but by whom? My grandmother, or the thing that inhabited Leela. It was too tall, too thin to be human. It swayed, a macabre dance in the dim light, and from its indistinct form I heard a sound. A soft, tinkling giggle like wind chimes made of bone. It was Leela's voice, but deeper, older, laced with an ancient, predatory glee. What had I truly unleashed all those years ago? And what was it doing here now in this house, waiting for me? The laundry room, industrial machines humming, vibrated through the concrete floor and up my legs. Each thud of a dryer drum was a physical blow, echoing the dull ache behind my eyes. I needed to get out. The air felt thick, suffocating, as if the very walls were exhaling a slow, viscous breath. I stumbled back, my hand finding the cold, slick metal of a washing machine. The rhythmic sloshing inside was like a choked gasp. Outside, the wind howled, a mournful sound that seemed to twist and curl around the house. It wasn't just wind. It was a chorus of whispers just beyond my hearing, promising things I didn't want to understand. My gaze fell on the exit, the heavy steel door that led back to the overgrown grounds to the world outside this suffocating shell. I took a step, then another. My boots squeaked on the damp concrete. Then the machine stopped. The abrupt silence was more terrifying than the noise. The only sound was my own ragged breathing and the frantic thumping of my heart, a trapped bird against my ribs. I stood frozen, listening, waiting. A faint clinking like porcelain on porcelain drifted from the far corner of the room. It was a small sound, delicate, yet it pierced the stillness like a shard of ice. My eyes darted towards the sound. Nothing. I forced myself to move. My hand, slick with sweat, reached for the door handle. As my fingers closed around it, a soft giggle echoed from the corner. It was a child's giggle, innocent and playful, but it was laced with something else, something sharp and ancient. My muscles tensed. I pulled, but the door didn't budge. It was as if it had been welded shut. I threw my shoulder against it, a desperate, futile act. The steel groaned but held fast. The giggling grew louder, closer. I spun around, my breath catching in my throat, and then I saw it. A small porcelain hand. It was pale, delicate, its fingers curled slightly. My mind reeled. It couldn't be. Not here, not now. The arm continued to emerge, impossibly long, impossibly smooth. It was attached to a body, a small, doll-like form clad in a faded calico dress. Leela. Her painted eyes, wide and vacant, fixed on me. It wasn't the voice of a doll. It was the voice of something that had been waiting, festering for years. I recoiled, stumbling back. The metallic tang in the air intensified, acrid and suffocating. The floor beneath me seemed to soften, to become yielding like mud. I looked. My boots were sinking, slowly, inexorably. "What do you want?" I choked out, my voice raw. Leela tilted her head, her porcelain features unmoving, yet conveying an unsettling amusement. "Just to play," she said, her voice a silken caress that sent shivers down my spine. The washing machines, which had been silent, suddenly roared to life. Not the familiar rumble, but a frantic, discordant clang. The dryers spun with violent speed, their metal doors rattling as if something was trying to break free from within. The air filled with the stench of ozone and burnt fabric. I looked at the door again. It was still there, a promise of escape, but it was now framed by the swirling, chaotic energy of the room. The floor continued to give way, pulling me down into the viscous gray. Leela took a step towards me. Her movements were jerky, unnatural, yet fluid. She didn't walk. She glided, her small feet not quite touching the floor. Her painted eyes never left mine. "We have so much to catch up on," she murmured. The smell of old pennies was overwhelming now, thick and cloying. I felt a pressure in my chest, as if the air itself was being squeezed out of me. My hands scrabbled at the now yielding concrete, finding no purchase. I was being pulled down, deeper and deeper into the suffocating embrace of the laundry room. Was this real? Or was it another one of her tricks, a phantom of my fractured mind? The air in the laundry room, industrial machines humming, was thick with a cloying sweetness, like overripe fruit left to rot. It clung to the back of my throat, a nauseating counterpoint to the metallic tang of old pennies. The relentless drone of the machines vibrated through the soles of my boots, a low thrumming that settled in my bones and set my teeth on edge. Each thud of a dryer drum was a physical blow, a percussive assault that mirrored the dull ache behind my eyes. The AI. No, not the AI. That was a distraction. Leela, he was here. I could feel her, a prickling awareness that crawled over my skin like 1,000 tiny spiders. I scanned the room, my gaze snagging on the stacked rows of white, sterile-looking machines. Their metallic exteriors gleamed dully under the harsh, fluorescent lights, their glass doors opaque with steam and lint. The smell intensified, a sickly perfume that seemed to emanate from the very walls, from the grimy grout between the tiles. It was the smell of decay, of things hidden too long. My hands, slick with a cold sweat, fumbled for the heavy iron door handle. It felt impossibly cold, like it had been dredged from a frozen lake. It was a child's bedroom, impossibly small, crammed into the back of the laundry room. Faded floral wallpaper, peeling at the edges, depicted cheerful, dancing bunnies that now seemed grotesque in their frozen grins. A small, tarnished brass bed stood against one wall, its mattress stained with what looked disturbingly like old rust. A dollhouse, intricately crafted but coated in a thick layer of dust, sat on a miniature mahogany table, and on the tiny, velvet-upholstered chair beside it sat Leela. She hadn't changed. Not really. The porcelain skin was still smooth, unnervingly so, and the painted blue eyes, framed by impossibly long lashes, were fixed on me with an unnerving intelligence. Her yellow dress, once bright and cheerful, was now a muted, faded hue, a shadow of its former self. But it was the smile, the same fixed, painted smile that sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins. It was wider now, somehow, more knowing. I could feel my heart racing, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. But beneath the fear, a flicker of something else ignited. Determination. I had come this far. I had unearthed the truth, pieced together the fragments of my fractured memories. I wouldn't let her win, not now. I rasped, my voice a dry whisper in the suffocating stillness. I rest still here. Her head tilted, a slow, deliberate movement that made the painted smile seem to stretch. No sound, no spoken word, just that unnerving gaze boring into me, dissecting every secret, every fear I'd ever harbored. The sweetness in the air intensified, now laced with something sharp, something acrid, like burnt sugar. I took a step forward, the floorboards creaking under my weight. The bunnies on the wallpaper seemed to recoil. I did it, all of it. I twisted everything. My voice gained strength, fueled by a desperate rage. I fed on my fear, on my pain. Leela remained silent, her painted eyes never leaving mine, but I felt it. A shift in the atmosphere, a subtle pressure building like the moments before a storm breaks. The dollhouse, untouched by my presence, shuddered. "This ends now," I declared, my voice ringing with a conviction I hadn't felt in years. I remembered the symbols, the words my grandmother had whispered in her final, lucid moments, the protective sigils. I dismissed them as the ramblings of a fading mind, but now I understood. I raised my hands, my fingers trembling, and began to trace the patterns in the air, the familiar shapes blooming in my mind's eye. The air grew heavy, charged with an unseen energy. The humming of the machines outside seemed to grow distant, muffled, as if they were miles away. Leela's painted smile seemed to falter for the briefest of instants, a flicker of something akin to surprise. Then the sweetness in the air turned to a bitter, acrid stench like burning plastic. Was I strong enough? Was this ritual enough to break her hold? The air in the laundry room, industrial machines humming, was thick with the scent of stale detergent and something else, something metallic and sharp that pricked at my nostrils. Leela sat on the scarred linoleum floor, her porcelain face unnervingly serene amidst the clatter and thrum of the massive washing units. Their metallic groans vibrated through my teeth, a constant, unsettling percussion. My hands, still slick with the strange, viscous residue from the dollhouse, trembled as I reached for the old iron poker leaning against the wall. It was cold, heavy, and felt blessedly real. She hadn't moved. Her painted smile, a thin slash of red, seemed to mock the terror coiling in my gut. They pulsed, a deep, bruised purple, clinging to the hulking metal drums of the machines like damp rags. The humming of the industrial washers seemed to deepen, to take on a guttural quality, as if the very building were sighing a mournful lament. I remembered my grandmother, her hands gnarled like ancient roots, always smelling faintly of lye and lavender. She'd spent hours in here, a ghost amidst the churning water and steam, her face a mask of grim determination. What had she known? What had she been trying to contain in this cavernous, echoing space? Leela's eyes, those unblinking glass orbs, followed my every move. I could feel her gaze, a physical weight pressing down on me. It wasn't just a doll anymore. It was an anchor, a conduit for something ancient and hungry that had latched onto my childhood and refused to let go. My breath hitched, but I had to. I took a step forward. The poker felt heavier now, a futile weapon against an enemy that existed in the spaces between things. The humming of the machine seemed to crescendo, the vibrations intensifying until the floor beneath my feet buzzed. A sudden burst of steam erupted from a vent near the ceiling, hissing like a wounded animal, momentarily obscuring Leela from view. When the steam cleared, he was still there, exactly as before. But something had changed. The air around her seemed to shimmer, distorting the light. A faint, sickly sweet scent like rotting flowers began to permeate the room, overpowering the harsh tang of detergent. I lunged. My hand, gripping the poker, swung out, aimed at the porcelain head. The metal connected with a sharp, sickening crack. Not the clean shatter I'd expected, but a dull thud, as if I'd struck something yielding, something impossibly dense. Leela's head didn't break. It tilted at an unnatural angle, her painted eyes now staring directly at the floor. The humming of the machines faltered, a sputtering cough in their steady rhythm. I stood there panting, the poker still clutched in my sweaty palm, staring at the doll. Her painted eyes, now askew, seemed to hold a flicker of something. Not pain, not anger, but a profound, ancient weariness. The sickly sweet odor began to dissipate, replaced by the sterile, metallic scent of the laundry room once more. The industrial machines resumed their steady hum, their rhythm unbroken. I had struck a blow, but it wasn't an ending. It was a pause. The tar-like fluid on the floor began to dry, forming an intricate, disturbing pattern. It looked disturbingly like a map, a twisted, broken labyrinth. I dropped the poker. It clattered loudly on the linoleum, the sound echoing in the sudden quiet. My legs felt weak, ready to give out. I had faced it. I had struck it. But the weight on my soul hadn't lifted. It had merely shifted, settling into a new, more permanent ache. I looked at Leela at her tilted head, her unnervingly serene expression. The fracture was small, almost imperceptible from a distance. But I knew it was there. A scar, a wound, they just festered. The machines continued their tireless work, a monotonous testament to the mundane world that existed outside this room, outside this house. Leela's painted eyes, even at their odd angle, seemed to watch me, to wait. Had I broken it, or merely angered it? And if it was merely angered, what would it do now?